Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for wanting to speak. And it's a great pleasure to speak in this debate called by the Honourable Member for Witney, who's made a very excellent introduction. I think he set out the history of carrier strike capability in the UK with aplomb, and really spoke highly of our capability and the opportunity in the future, which was fantastic. I share the sentiments of my honourable friend, the member for Stoke-on-Trent North, who raised the industrial capability issues. And I speak with some degree of interest in that because I think I'm the only member in this House who was actually involved in the design and construction of the Queen Elizabeth class aircraft carriers in Glasgow. And one of the most striking aspects of being involved with the project was when I first started as a graduate at BAE Systems, and the chief engineer gave us a briefing about the Queen Elizabeth class, and he was talking about the complexity of the project. And the one thing he really did to strike it home to us was he put up an image of an aerial photograph of RAF Lossiemouth. And he said, you're looking at 5.6 million square metres of real estate there, and that's what we have to now. We have to take the same amount of traffic of aircraft movements and condense it into 0.3% of the space. And that's how we deliver the Queen Elizabeth class aircraft carrier. So that just shows you how complex the delivery of an aircraft carrier is, because you're essentially taking an airfield and compacting it into 0.3% of the space and trying to deliver the same intensity of operations at sea in all weather conditions. So that's really, in a nutshell, why an aircraft carrier is such a complex project, and is probably amongst the top 5 most complex engineering projects ever undertaken by mankind. And it's a great testament to British engineering that we have been able to achieve this capability despite the challenges faced by inconsistent construction runs and feast and famine orders that have plagued our shipbuilding industry for decades. And I think that's what my honourable friend, the member for Stoke-on-Trent North, was hinting at. And also, actually, the member for Witney as well. He talked about the bad decisions that were made in the 1960s. For example, the cancellation of the CVA-01 aircraft carrier project, which was intended to be called HMS Prince of Wales and Queen Elizabeth. We got there only 40 years later. But also the cancellation of the TSR-2 strategic bomber at that time as well. And it seems like history has a habit of repeating itself. I lament the very poor decisions that were made in the 2010 Strategic Defence and Security Review, which destroyed the Nimrod maritime patrol aircraft, which are now recognised as a failure of judgment, and we're trying to replicate, but with the loss of British sovereign capability to build large fixed-wing aircraft like the Nimrod. Also looking at the failure to sort of adapt our shipbuilding capabilities for the long term as well. I do fear that the National Shipbuilding Strategy does have a series of flaws in it, and we have to be aware of what those flaws are, because what happened with the construction of the aircraft carrier was a real difficulty to get match fit again to deal with the scale of that project. And that was largely what I was concerned with in Govan. I've got a photograph, actually, of me standing in Bay 1 of the ship block and outfit hall at Govan as lower block 4 is transferred out of that hall and onto a barge to be taken to Rosyth. But the size and the beam of the aircraft carrier was actually dictated by the fact that it was a shipyard built by a Norwegian company to build gas tankers in the late 1980s and 1990s. That's the width of the aircraft carrier was determined by how big this hall was that was built. So we were building it in a shipyard that was never ever designed or constructed to build an aircraft carrier. So the whole structure of the aircraft carrier was designed around the industrial limitations we had. And it feels to me that we haven't learned that the mistakes that were made and the constraints that were imposed by it in the industry in building this project. And that's why we haven't really looked at how the National Shipbuilding Strategy is getting us to upper quartile performance in world shipbuilding. And that's something that is a glaring omission from that document. And I hope that the work of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Shipbuilding and Ship Repair that is bringing forward a review of the National Shipbuilding Strategy in the next few weeks will hopefully offer constructive and positive suggestions as to how we can improve that strategy. It's critical that we get that right. Looking at the threat to the shipbuilding industry, we've already seen that in Glasgow, certainly, 2,723 people are supported on a full-time equivalent basis by the shipbuilding industry, and it supports an additional 3,220 jobs in Scotland. And that speaks to the scale of the whole aircraft carrier project, which supported not just 8,000 shipyard workers in 8 shipyards. So that's a slight correction. And if you include Scotstoun and Govan as separate, distinct shipyards, there's 8. Don't never confuse Govan and Scotstoun as one shipyard. It's a fatal error in Glasgow.
Give way.
Happy to give way.
I thank the honourable member, my friend, for giving way. I think actually he may want to raise this issue with the minister, because that's the data available on the Royal Navy website.
Well,
I must correct the Minister of Defence. There's a fairly indignant and Glaswegians will be coming banging on your door. But the issue goes back to the drumbeat of orders and stability in the order book. Because I used to sit with colleagues in the shipyard and we'd look at resource planning and we'd plug in different projects and we'd see the curve of labour demand over the next 10, 15 years. And we knew that at a certain point redundancies would have to be made or contractions would have to be made because the loading of the shipyard's work programme was not smoothed. And that is because of a failure of proper coordinated planning between the Ministry of Defence, the Treasury in terms of financing projects, and industry to make sure that we've got as stable and smooth a curve as possible, which then delivers learning curve benefits, industrial efficiency, and also the confidence to invest in world-class infrastructure and processes that creates a virtuous cycle that delivers world-class competitive edge, that then means we can sell ships around the world competitively priced and deliver a sustainable and growing shipbuilding industry. If we can get that equation properly correct and optimised, then we're in a good place. But I fear that the National Shipbuilding Strategy isn't going to address that. And one of the symptoms of it is, I have to say, the Type 31E. It's a laudable aspiration, but the reality is we're committing the same mistake again and again and again of going to year zero and designing and building a new platform from scratch every time. It's a total failure of understanding of how this works in industry. The Americans have been building the Arleigh Burke class for the last 30 years with incremental improvements to the same platform. We need to get onto that sort of concept and we need to work to that sort of concept. There's no reason why we can't adapt the Type 45 hull for a number of different uses, and there's no reason why we can't adapt the Type 26 hull for a number of different uses. Actually, building the ship as a raw steel box, if you like, is only about 8% of the overall capital cost. It's about how you spec it and how you fit it out that drives the cost into the platform. So if we can just get a standardised basic ship type for each type of ship needed for the Royal Navy, that's how we drive efficiency into the programmes and get more hulls into the water and build a rigorous carrier strike battle group around the Queen Elizabeth class that will allow us to get the bulk back into the Royal Navy. Having spoken to the Royal Navy, they've said they've got 19 escorts just now. They need 24 to meet all their current planning needs. So the Navy needs to meet that gap. How are we going to do it? No definition of how that's happening. I would say we need 24 plus more to meet that. We used to have 32 escorts as recently as 20 years ago. How do we get back to that situation? I don't think Type 31 is going to solve that problem. So how do we fix that issue? Because it's not just about looking at the aircraft carriers, which are a fantastic ship and class of ship in isolation. It's about how we build that resilience into the carrier strike battle group. And if we don't get the escort proposition correct and efficient, then we're not going to meet that need. And that's why it goes back to getting our industrial capability correct. And that's not been addressed by the National Shipbuilding Strategy. And another symptom of that problem is the Fleet Solid Support Ships competition. Absolutely insane, if you ask me, to be even entertaining an international competition for this, because it belies any understanding of how to drive value into the project. So looking at the Fleet Solid Support Ship, 6,700 jobs created or secured, including 1,800 shipyard jobs, including 450 apprentices, and indeed £272 million recycled back into the UK economy through wage and supplier payments to the Treasury. Those figures must be weighted in the judgment for the UK bid on Fleet Solid Support Ships, and it must be weighted into the need to sustain the critical mass of industrial capability that the aircraft carrier project left as a legacy at Rosyth, where we're looking at over 1,000 job losses potentially in the next few years across the Babcock Group and shipbuilding, the closure of Appledore, which built the bulbous bows for the aircraft carrier. There's huge industrial capabilities that are at risk. I mean, we've just seen the Rugby site, which builds the electric motors for the integrated electric propulsion system. One of the most fantastic industrial achievements of the UK, the integrated electric propulsion system for the Type 45 and the aircraft carrier, now at risk again because General Electric are proposing to close that strategically important site. These are things that need to be gripped by the Ministry of Defence and the Treasury, because we're losing a war of attrition here on our industrial capability around the shipbuilding industry. Yep, happy to give way.
I thank the Honourable Member for giving way. I just want to touch on the capability that we're losing from General Electric. We've already lost one of the capabilities that was in my constituency in Kidsgrove. We were given assurances that the capability would be sustainable long term after its redeployment to Rugby and Stafford, and yet now we're losing it too. Industry just isn't supporting us in the right way if it's not part of a sovereign skills capability, and they know there's a steady drumbeat of orders.
Yeah. Thank you. I thank my for that intervention. It's critically important that we look at not just the first-tier original equipment manufacturers like BAE Systems and Rolls-Royce, where the government has golden shares and they can direct, to an extent, operational decision-making. But we need to look at the second and third-tier supply chains as well, which, after all, 3,000 people involved in the construction of the aircraft carrier project were in the supply chain. So we need to look at those industrial capabilities that are critical to maintaining sovereign capability. It's clear that there's an operational decision by General Electric to move that capability to France. Well, it's not in the British national interest, so we need to make that clear to them, and we're not going to accept it. That's as simple as that, and it's the duty of this government to make that case. And if necessary, put whatever leverage is required to make it change its mind. That's what government's there to do, to correct negative decisions by the market. That's what needs to happen to sustain our industrial capability. So my vision is that we get a better national shipbuilding strategy that looks to the future, that looks to the capabilities we need to sustain, and also ensures that we have a financial and a long-term capital investment proposition with the Treasury that reflects the complexity and long-term nature of shipbuilding programmes and properly finances them on a multi-year generational basis, and also invests in the capital infrastructure required in our shipyards to get them match fit. It was the greatest tragedy that we looked at a world-class shipbuilding capability on the Clyde, which hasn't been realised. We're still building our Type 26s in that same old hull built by a Norwegian company to build gas tankers that they did in the 1980s. It served us well, but I tell you what, when they did the business case for building that hull in the 1980s, they sure as hell didn't think they were going to be building aircraft carriers and Type 26 frigates in it. So we have to look at not just the narrow business case for one programme and the investment for building Type 26 in this shipyard. It's about all the other ships that are going to follow in its wake. This is talking about a 50 to 60-year capital investment programme, and the huge industrial benefit of doing that is enormous. And the Minister of Defence just has not addressed it, I'm afraid. And I hope the Minister will look to address that point in his remarks to the Chamber, because it is crucial that we start to think about it in those terms. Simple silo mentality when it comes to projects isn't serving our defence industrial capability whatsoever. We need to have a much more broader view of it, much more integration to secure the skills base in our ageing shipyard workforce, infuse it with more apprentices, have a training programme that's sustainable, and have a stable demand pipeline through programmes like the Fleet Solid Support Ships, which should be plugged in to take up the slack that's came out of losing the downscaling of the aircraft carrier programme. Similarly, why we're not planning for a proper replacement for HMS Ocean rather than retrofitting merchant vessels. I think that's a rather foolish and superficial way of doing it. Let's properly build a new landing helicopter dock platform and also look towards the replacement of the Albion class as well in a similar way, and build a world-class shipyard that's able to deliver it. That's what we need to do to pull all this together and really realise the industrial legacy of the Queen Elizabeth class programme, which was an exemplar for British engineering, a truly world-class and world-leading programme. And we look at building the space shuttle, building the International Space Station. The Queen Elizabeth class aircraft carrier is up there with the most complex engineering projects ever undertaken by the human race. And we should be having great national celebration about that achievement. But let's make the most of the legacy.